Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second edition of the ADC Candidate Forum. My name is Trinidad Jacial, and I am very pleased to be your host today for the second year in a row. And I want to say thank you, everyone, for being a part of this and for joining us. I am not sure how many people are on already, but we're going to give a few minutes for everyone to sort out connection problems, be able to make yourself comfortable, grab your pen and paper if you want to take notes today. Call everyone that you think want to join us, and we are expecting a lot of people today. And I'm gonna start just saying thank you to the presenters as well for giving us a little bit of their time, their very valuable time, and because they are gonna giving us a lot of very important information today. We are very pleased as well to see that so many people showed interest, and we are expecting a lot of people to join us today. So the purpose of this forum, as you might know, is to just provide some valuable information regarding topics that were suggested or requested by ADC candidates that will be very helpful when you start working in Australia, or for the ones that are already working in Australia. It is amazing to have this opportunity to get this information. I am going to remind you that there is, if there is anything that you're interested to maybe hear about or learn for maybe the next edition of this forum candidate, just let us know and we might be able to make it happen. We have the presenters that are going to be joining us today here with us. So thank you again. They're going to be giving us an insight of their different areas of expertise. We're going to have Dr. Annalyn Weston. Hello, Annalyn. How are you today? And Annalyn is going to be talking about the legalities of our profession, how not to get sued, and what does a safe practice look and feel like. We have here Dr. Ben Keith. Thank you, Ben, for joining us. And Ben will be explaining about some regulatory requirements of continuing professional development, or the famous CPD hours. And we have with us today Associate Professor John Boucher, who will be telling us about examination, diagnosis, and treatment planning. Thank you all for joining us. We have Dr. Felicia Valianatos. She will be opening this session. So we're just waiting for a few minutes to make sure that everyone who wants to join us today is here. And again, I want to thank everyone for your time today. We know we have many people from different countries. Some of you are just starting your day. Some of you are in the middle of the working day. Some of you might be knocking off and just ready to go home, but you decided to turn your computers on, turn your phones off, and just joining us today. So thank you everyone for your time. And once again, my name is Trinidad Jacial, and I will be your host today in this ADC Candidate Forum 2024. I'm not sure if I should wait a little bit more, just to give everyone time to join us. We have all the presenters here with us. We are just waiting for more people to join us. I know it takes a while to get everything sorted, so please be patient, but we will be starting this forum in a few minutes. Okay, I think we have lots of people starting to getting connected and still going up. I know we have people from all over the world, so please be patient. Again, I want to thank Dr. Annalyn Weston, Dr. Ben Keith, and Dr. Associate Professor John Boucher. We have Dr. Felicia Valianatos here with us. So I am going to just go ahead and start officially this ADC Candidate Forum. I would like to acknowledge that I am hosting this webinar from the lens of the Gimoi, Woolabara, Yidinyi, and Jurganji peoples. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are located today, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today. And a little bit about myself. My name is Trinidad Jacial, but everyone calls me Trini. I am a recently successful candidate of the ADC assessment process. I completed a Bachelor of Dental Surgery in 2011, gained experience in both private and public sectors, and specialized in prosthodontics in Chile. In 2016, I decided to migrate to Australia, and I'm currently based in Cairns with a beautiful family. I have two lovely little girls that keep me busy, and finally I am working as a dentist here. So that's me. I have recently joined the ADC Assessment Committee, and I am the new chair of the candidate reference group. So I am pleased to be here representing all of you as a dentist now, but a candidate forever. So thank you all for being with us today. And to start, I have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Felicia Valenatos.
Thank you, Dr. Trini, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, thank you to all the candidates for attending this forum. Engaging in the ADC assessment and examination process, it's such a significant milestone in your professional journey. So this is where we see the dedication, your perseverance, and your vision converging to build a successful future. I'm very excited to stand before you today as the newly appointed chair of the Australian Dental Council Board of Directors. But what you would also be interested to know is that many years ago, I sat where you are sitting now as an overseas trained dentist, filled with hope, determination, and yes, a fair share of nerves. I do remember vividly my anticipation, the long nights of preparation, the weight of knowing that this exam was not just a test of knowledge, but was a gateway to realize my dreams of becoming a dentist in Australia. It wasn't easy, but let me assure you, it was worth every effort. Your decision to pursue dentistry in Australia is more than a career choice. It's a commitment to make a difference in the lives of other people. We love dentistry, don't we? It's a unique profession. It combines science, art, and compassion. You have chosen to embrace a role that is stepping into a position of trust in Australia, a position of responsibility, one that will profoundly impact your patients and the communities that you will serve. This exam that you are engaging in is challenging, yet it is not designed to hold you back. I would like you to see it as an opportunity to showcase your hard-earned knowledge, your skills, your dedication to the profession. Please make it a test of your readiness to join a community of health professionals, people who play an essential role in the well-being of the society. And I encourage you to view this moment as a bridge to the future you have envisioned and you worked so hard to achieve. I'm someone who has walked this path just like Dr. Trini, and I understand the stress, the pressure you may be feeling right now. But let me share a thought that carried me through. Every challenge that I faced in preparation for this exam was a step towards becoming the professional I wanted to be. Embrace the challenge. It'll make you stronger, more capable, and a wonderful version of yourself. You're not alone in the journey. Today, we are joined by almost, 2,000 of your peers, future colleagues who, just like you, are driven by the passion for dentistry. One day you will collaborate, you will share knowledge, you will support one another as part of the dental community. And perhaps among you, there is someone who will stand where I am today, helping to guide the Australian Dental Council and the profession forward. I would like to encourage you to believe in yourselves, to trust in the hard work that you have put in, and to approach this examination with confidence. You have chosen to contribute to the society in a meaningful way, and that choice is commendable and is empowering. As you prepare for the examination and the path beyond the exam, I wish you resilience in the face of the challenges. I would like you to have the clarity of the mind in your moments of doubt, but success in achieving your dreams. Remember that the journey is as important as the destination. And today, you are one step closer to making a lasting impact in the world as a health professional. The dental profession in Australia, I can assure you, needs your talent, your dedication, and your vision. So therefore today, on behalf of the board, I wish you much success in your preparation, your examination, and of course, in your future as dentists. Thank you, and may this forum mark the beginning of a transformative chapter in your lives. Thank you very much, Dr. Trini. I'm just going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Felicia, for your time, for joining us with your amazing words of encouragement, of wisdom and experience. You talk about commitment and choice and success, and just considering this as a bridge or a step towards becoming what we always envision. That's always something to keep in mind, because as we know, this is a very hard process, and sometimes we can go through some hoops and we can face discouragement, and we just need you to believe in yourself, believe that you're capable, believe that you are strong, and just trust on that resilience that we have, and just close your eyes and see where you want to be, and hopefully you will get there very, very soon. Thank you, Felicia.
Thank you.
And I apologize because I feel we missed some proper introduction to Dr. Felicia, so I am still going to do it. So Dr. Felicia is an experienced general dentist, senior in healthcare manager, and passionate advocate for professional excellence. She is a manager of health management, a graduate of Australian Institute of Company Directors, a fellow of the Royal Australasian College of Dental Surgeons, a fellow of the International College of Dentists, a fellow of the Pierre Fauchard Academy, an associate fellow of the Australasian College of Health Service Management, and an honorary fellow of the University of Melbourne. As some of you know, or we just mentioned, she has been with the ADC for more than 2 decades, including her personal experience as a candidate who successfully completed the ADC examinations. And as she says all the time, once a candidate, always a candidate. So I am again also delighted to say my congratulations to Felicia, because she has been appointed as the new chair of the ADC board. Thank you so much, Felicia, for being with us and opening this forum.
Trini, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
And now I would like to remind everything that this webinar is being recorded. The format of the webinar is going to consist on 3 presentations. We're going to break it up after these 2 first presentations and have a brief panel discussion with questions. And then after the 3rd presentation, we are going to have more questions if we have time. Whatever questions you have, please send it to us. They will be moderated, and the responses of the most common questions that cannot be addressed during these panel discussions will be provided after the webinar. So very soon you will be able to access some questions and answers and the recording of this ADC candidate forum. So let's start with session number 1. I would like to welcome Dr. Annalene Weston. Are you here with us, Annalene?
I am.
Hello, Annalene.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. So Annalene is going to give us an insight on how not to get sued, or what does a safe practice look and feel like. Dr. Annalene Weston is a dental legal consultant for Dental Protection Australia, providing collegiate support and advice. Annalene completed her undergraduate dental degree in the UK and worked in NHS, or National Health Service, and private dentistry before immigrating. She has worked across 3 Australian states in private and public dentistry, and gained her master's in health law through the University of Sydney Faculty Law. Annalene has been awarded fellowships to the American College of Dentistry, the Pierre Fauchard Academy, and the International College of Dentistry in recognition of her strong work in ethics. In addition to her role with Dental Protection, Annalene maintains practice part-time. So we're going to welcome Dr. Annalene and enjoy her presentation.
Thanks, Trini. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to start off by sharing. Trini, if you could just give me a thumbs up so I know that everyone could see that, that would be absolutely fantastic, because I just want to be sure you can see that screen. And wonderful. I just thought I'd check, because there's nothing worse than not checking and then it's all going horribly wrong. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here to speak with you this evening. For those of you I haven't had the privilege of meeting before, my name is Annalene and I'm a dentist. And I also have a law degree. And this means that I work as a dental legal consultant for dental protection. Now, this all sounds fascinating, but what does it actually mean? Well, essentially, I'm the person that you call on the worst day of your life. I'm the person that you call when something's gone wrong and a patient's been harmed. I'm the person you call when you open your mailbox and you've got that dreaded letter of complaint from a patient, or maybe worse than that, from AHPRA, or maybe even worse than that, from a lawyer. And I'm the person that you call when you're frightened and the walls start closing in. And simply put, my job is to get you through the most difficult and stressful time of your professional life and get the best possible outcome for you, your professional reputation, and your registration. So I've been asked to speak here today about how not to be the person who has to ring me, because we're always happy to take a call. But I think the first question people always ask is, how can I not be that person? And so what's safe practice going to look and feel like? But also to answer the really important question of, why do we actually need indemnity? Because I mentioned that I work for an indemnifier, which again is fascinating, but what does that actually mean? Well, it's a requirement of your registration that you have to have indemnity when you're a practicing dental practitioner in Australia. And indemnity is essentially a bucket of money. And that bucket of money is there when a patient gets harmed and they need to be fixed, or if you need to pay legal fees, because unfortunately, there will always be a percentage of patients who come into your practice with, whether they come in with this mindset or whether they just develop it as they move through. Not every interaction with a patient that you have will be easy, and not every treatment that you do will go well. And it's just an important fact of dentistry, really. So people like me exist to help in those situations. Another thing that I was asked to touch on is when somebody can successfully sue in Australia, because I think it's important to have this concept, because you will find from time to time people will complain and they'll accuse you of negligence, or they'll say they're going to sue you. But what does that actually mean? Well, in order to successfully sue somebody in Australia, there need to be three boxes that get ticked, I guess. So the first box is duty of care. Um, your duty of care to a patient is inherent. It just happens as soon as that patient becomes your patient. And in fact, there have been situations where practitioners have been found to have a duty of care to a patient before they've even touched them. Broadly, though, if a patient's been in your chair, you have a duty of care to them. So we can tick that box. The third box to tick, and yes, I know I've jumped one, is the patient has to have suffered harm. So there has to have been something that's gone wrong and the patient has to have been hurt. Now, you would think that that's a given, because people wouldn't be complaining or trying to sue if they hadn't have been hurt. But you'd be surprised how many people just think you've done the wrong thing when actually you haven't. So that needs to be assessed. Okay, those two. The thing in the middle is the kicker. This is the one that's really, really hard to prove, and it's called a breach. And a breach is, simply put, doing something that you shouldn't have done or not doing something that you should have. So you're doing a root canal treatment, you don't put rubber dam on, and the patient inhales an endodontic file and they get hurt because they've got an endodontic file in their lung. Okay. Did we have a duty of care? Tick. Has the patient suffered harm? Tick. Is there something that we should have done that we didn't? Well, tick. Yeah, we didn't put rubber dam on. So under those circumstances, we are negligent. How about if we're taking some teeth out of a patient and we didn't realize that they were on a blood thinning medication and they start to bleed out? Did we have a duty? Yep. Have they suffered harm? Yep. We can't stop them from bleeding. Was there something we should have done? Yep. And that's the breach. So that's what you need to remember. Generally, there are things that we ought to do, and that tends to be where people fall foul. Now, I don't need to tell you to lock in your basics. This probably is one of the most pedestrian slides, but it's also one of the most helpful things in practice, remembering to do a full examination on patients and take and interpret in special tests to get the correct diagnosis so that we can do the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. Of more interest today, I want to share with you a magic formula or a recipe for success, if you will. And if you were to follow this recipe, every time you treated a patient, you would almost never receive a complaint. And on the very rare occasions that you did receive a complaint, you would almost always be able to defend yourself. This sounds attractive, doesn't it? It sounds like something you want to see. And of course, I want to share that with you. And again, I know it all looks very simple, but risk management 101 and avoiding having to bring people like me 101 is what you say to patients before you touch them, including the all-important conversation of consent. It's about writing down both what you did and what you said. And if you take nothing else away from me today, please take away this. As proceduralists, we're amazing at writing down what we do, and we're rubbish at writing down our discussions with our patients. And when people like me are trying to defend you, it's not usually on whether the treatment took place, because that's obvious, that's apparent. It's whether the discussions around that treatment took place. So that tends to be where we fall short. The final leg of the chair is self-care. Simply put, you cannot pour from an empty cup. And we tend to find as clinicians, we push and we push and we push and we push, believing that we're doing this in the best interests of our patients. And then we just fall in a puddle. We can't take care of people if we don't take care of ourselves. Okay, that's the old phrase, physician, heal thyself, isn't it? So I'm going to touch across each of these in turn quite quickly, and then we're going to finish off by looking at a case. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was communication, which is both what you say and how you say it. Now, there are lots of people in the practice that we communicate with: the patient, their parent or partner or carer, and of course our staff. And what we communicate to each of them will be different, even if it's about the same procedure. So if I'm doing a crown, for example, what I tell my front office is very different to what I tell my lab, and it's very different to what I tell the patient. Yeah. And the benefits of communicating effectively become quite self-apparent, because if I don't give the correct information to reception, I'm going to get the wrong time, or to the lab, I'm going to get the wrong crown. But there are some less obvious benefits to communicating well and some costs to communicating poorly. And I just want to take a moment to explore those. So the first studies about this were done in the field of obstetrics. And what they wanted to know is which patients sued. What had to go wrong with the birth of a baby for a patient to sue, or someone to sue? Did someone have to be hurt? Did someone have to die? Did everybody have to be hurt? What was the threshold? And the people who did these studies found, to their surprise, that not everybody who something went wrong in the birth of their child actually sued. And in fact, only 3% of patients where something went wrong during the birth of their child actually sued. Now, I don't know about you, but that feels quite low, doesn't it? You'd think it would be much higher. So the researchers thought they'd better have a look and see if this was just like a baby thing or if it was a general thing. And they had a look at this across all disciplines of medicine and dentistry, and they found that sometimes only 1% of patients, when something goes wrong during their care, complains or sues. Now, I can tell you that there are not enough things going wrong across Australia for 1% of things going wrong to generate all the complaints that we see. So what they decided to do was have a look the other way and see where the complaints came from. And to their surprise, they found that almost all complaints and claims, so a claim is litigation, arose, nothing had gone wrong with the treatment. That's extraordinary, isn't it? And so they asked this group of patients, the people who didn't complain, why didn't you complain? Like, you could have, no one would have blamed you, something bad happened. And this group of patients said, I didn't complain because she said sorry and I know she meant it. I didn't complain because he sat with me and he held my hand while I cried, and he didn't need to do that. He's a busy person. I didn't complain because they were as upset as I was. I know that they really never wanted this to happen to me. And conversely, they asked the people where nothing had gone wrong, look, why did you complain? Because like nothing actually went wrong. And that group of people said, I complained because he was mean. Complained because she never listened and she always interrupted and she never returned my calls. I complained because I wasn't made to feel like a person. No one cared. This is critically important because what it tells us is whether or not people complain about us is really heavily influenced by how we communicate with them. And the studies show, we have a saying in dental protection, people don't sue their friends. And what that means is if patients like you and critically think you like them sufficiently, so you don't even have to like them a lot, you just have to like them enough, or they have to think you like them enough, they're far less likely to complain about you if something goes wrong. And as I mentioned, in the practice of dentistry, things can and will go wrong. And so it's really helpful if you've got some goodwill built up with that patient, a bucket of goodwill, if you will. So if something goes wrong and you need to draw on it, there's something there. The most important conversation you will ever have with a patient is the conversation of consent. And this is a huge topic in itself. And for those of you who are dental protection members, we have a lot of information on our e-learning platform and CPD about consent because it's such a huge subject. But for the purposes of today, what you need to remember is that people don't like nasty surprises. They like to know what's going to happen, preferably before it does. And anything that goes wrong in the treatment, if you tell the patient before it goes wrong, it's an explanation. But if you tell the patient after it goes wrong, it's an excuse. So to give you a really simple example, if I'm taking an impression for a crown, now I'm old, so I still take impressions, plus I can't get near the scanner because all the young dentists in my clinic are using it. Okay, so I still take impressions. I know that impression might drag, and I know that having a second impression taken isn't pleasant. So if I warn the patient that I might need to take a second impression and I don't have to because my first impression's good, they'll think I'm a legend. If alternatively I do have to, they'll be okay about it because they knew that it was a possibility. Imagine if I hadn't told them and then I take the impression and the patient's gagging and then I say to them, oh, I'm really sorry, I have to do this again. They can only think one of two things. Thing number one is, I'm so lucky that Annalene's so thorough. Thing number two is, Annalene's an idiot. They actually can't think anything else. So tell patients what you think is going to happen, preferably before it does, particularly if you think there's a chance something's going to go wrong. No nasty surprises in dentistry, please. It's really important to remember that consent is not a form and it's not an administrative process. People can get very hung up on consent forms and think if they get the patient to sign something that all of a sudden everything's okay. Consent is a conversation, and according to our regulator, we need to exchange some information with that patient so they have a knowledge and understanding of the benefits of the treatment and the risk involved. This conversation, what you need to imagine is when the patient comes in, you're up here with what you know about their procedure because they only know from their lived experience and maybe some research they've done on Google that may or may not be of any benefit. But they know something that you don't know. They know all about themselves, their values, their expectations, what they want from the treatment. So during the conversation of consent, you need to impart knowledge to that patient to bring their level of understanding up, just like here, where they're on an equal understanding. And conversely, you need to listen so they can impart information to you. Only then can you have that adult conversation. It's not unreasonable for a patient to want to know the nature and the purpose of the treatment that you're proposing, what you think can happen, what could go wrong, what you're going to do if it does, including any additional costs if something goes wrong, how many times they're going to sit in the chair, how long they've got to sit in the chair for, what alternatives there are, including the alternative of no treatment, which may well be reasonable. And that is best covered off in a conversation. Now, you'll see I popped a resource up. We have a really comprehensive resource on consent on the Dental Protection webpage. This is available to both members and non-members. So I just put that up so you could take a screenshot of that because, as I said, consent is a huge, huge, huge topic. And we're not going to cover off on it in 3 minutes. But I hope I've given you some food for thought to get started. Now, as I mentioned, records is writing down both what we did and what we said, and we're not very good at writing down our discussions with patients. And that's partly because people get muddled about why we're keeping dental records in the first instance, because they think that records are for us. They're not. The records are the patient's record, okay? You need to imagine the patient as being on a journey, and anyone who picks up that journey picks up the record, needs to know where the patient started, where they're going, and how far on that route they are. Particularly if, like me, you're working at a practice with lots of practitioners where you pass the patients between each other. You need to know what the patient thinks is going to happen next. Imagine that you were going to write your records and put them in a box and then pull them out in 10 years and sit and have a coffee with me, possibly with cake. If you can't tell me who was in the room, what did you do? Why? What did you use? Where did you put the anesthetic? What was your timing of the treatment? Why? If you can't tell me the who, what, where, when, and why, then it is highly likely that your records do not meet the standard. That standard, I'm sure you've already been given this resource, but there's a really helpful resource on the Dental Board webpage called the Self-Reflection Tool, and it enables you to put that over your own records to see if there are any gaps. And I would strongly encourage you to do that just to see, because if you're missing something, it's almost always that same thing. Now, a lot of people think that in order to write good records, they just need to write more, write lots. That's not really the case. Your records need to be on the case. They need to be clear. They need to be accurate. They need to be sufficient to ensure continuity of patient care. They have to be enough, but they also have to be efficient, because you can't spend half the appointment time writing records. Those of you who are working in practices, for example, as dental assistants, have a think about situations where people are writing loads and loads and loads and loads and loads. And think about how hard it is to find the actual detail of the patient's journey in all those notes. Conversely, think about those notes that are too short and they're not sufficient. They're not helpful either, are they? Templating can be helpful, but a lot of people put way too much in their template trying to be efficient. It's a balance, okay? And again, this is something that we can very much help our members of Dental Protection as we provide a lot of resources around record keeping, because it's kind of super important. And finally, you need to take care of you. We have a saying in Dental Protection: if you are hungry, angry, late and tired, please halt, please stop, take a minute, have a sandwich, do what you need to do. If you do not bring your best version of yourself to work, you are statistically significantly more likely to harm a patient. And that's extraordinary. So if COVID has taught us nothing, I think it's taught us not to go to work sick. So just think about managing yourself, your body, taking care of yourself so you can take care of others, and being aware of times when maybe you're just not up for it today, you're just poorly, okay? Now, I wanted to finish off, as I promised, with a case. This isn't a legal case. This is quite a standard regulatory case that happened to a colleague who'd been practicing in Australia for about 4 months, so about 16 weeks. And I just want to talk you through what happened. This case went to the regulator. It went to AHPRA. So our colleague was working Easter weekend, and the principal was nowhere to be seen. They were working alone in the practice, and it was the Saturday of Easter. And she was only working a half day. And that afternoon, she was going to go off to Bali with her sister. And the practice was going to be closed for a couple of days. And she was absolutely jammers, fully booked with emergencies. A regular patient of the practice came in holding his face, pain, 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 been keeping him awake all week. One would question why he couldn't come sooner, but he hadn't. Pain, 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 pain. Back tooth, back tooth, back tooth. 1-7, 1-7. So he's pointing to his 1-7, and she has a look, and it has a big old filling in it, and she taps it with the mirror handle, and he shoots out the chair. So she takes an X-ray and she goes, yep, that 1-7 has got a really big filling to the pulp. I'm going to take the pulp out of that. And she extirpates the tooth with all appropriate risks and warnings in place under rubber dam. She manages to get to her flight just in time. So she didn't miss her flight, which was amazing. Unfortunately, the patient came in a couple of days later when the practice had reopened, and he was still in pain. And obviously our colleague's not there, she's on a beach. So one of her colleagues, another dentist at the practice, had a look and did a limited examination and saw something and took a second radiograph. Now, some of you would have seen that cavity on the 5 in the first X-ray, but many of you wouldn't, for a couple of reasons. Just going to go back to it. First of all, the radiograph is great of the 7. It's not a great X-ray of the 5. Another reason is I distracted you. How many times did I say 1717, back tooth 17? That's what patients do. They distract us, right? Another reason is I rushed you, didn't I? I didn't put that X-ray up for very long. I would have had it up for maybe 10 seconds at best. And unfortunately, I did that to simulate the circumstances of our poor colleague, because that's what's happened to her. So this poor patient, he ends up having this 5 extirpated. The 7 had already been extirpated, and he's now pain-free. So our colleague comes back from holiday after a couple of weeks, and she's told about this issue. So she rings the patient to tell him to apologize and ask him if he wants to come in to discuss. And she actually very kindly offered to do both root canal treatments on the 7 and the 5 at no cost to him, which was just her trying to make good with him. But he said, look, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize you were going to be gone for weeks. I got cranky waiting for you to call, and I've made a complaint. So with a heavy heart, she knew the complaint was coming. She went back to review her records. And this is what she found. Now, this isn't some like random computer glitch. This is what she found. She had no records at all. Because in her rush, she hadn't written any notes. She only had the codes. Now, our colleague has got 3 doors open to her at this time. 3 options. Path number 1, she can go knowing she's got a complaint with no records and just admit to the dental board what's happened. Option 2, she can go in on the code, the 415 code, and write the records as best as she can from her memory, making it look like they were written on the day. Option 3, she can create a new note saying records for 10th of March or whatever, but appropriately dated, and write her records as best as she can remember. The difference with option 3 is it's not deceptive. She's writing records as best as she can remember to try and assist with continuity of patient care, but she's not trying to cover up the fact she missed it. Because one thing I promise you is that the regulator will notice, and the consequences of dishonesty far outweigh the consequences of many other actions as a dental practitioner. Pleasingly, our colleague took lucky door number 3. And when she went to the regulator and she explained what had happened, she got told off, but there were no conditions placed on her registration. There was no significant findings made against her, because at the end of the day, she'd made a mistake, but she was honest about it. We also walked her through that. So just be mindful. There are things that can happen. And if you're not sure what to do, it's always helpful to ring the worst day of your life lady or your equivalent to get some advice. So in summary then, communication's a malleable skill. Nurture it, grow it, and invest in time in it. People do not sue their friends. If patients like you and they think you sufficiently like them, they will be very forgiving, because things can and will go wrong in the practice of dentistry. Consent's a conversation. Don't fall into this trap of thinking it's a form. Consent forms are super helpful as a scaffold, but they can't replace your conversation of consent. If you just give a patient a form, they'll say, I didn't read it, I didn't understand it, or she made me sign it. And there can be no consent under those circumstances. Patients also can't consent about treatment. You can't do something really horrible and rubbish and then say, oh, well, you gave consent to that perforation when you've burred a huge hole in the bottom of the tooth. It doesn't work like that either. Consent is based on accepted practice. Remember that records allow continuity of patient care, and while they're there for the patient, they're going to be everything if you have a complaint. And please remember, hungry, angry, late, and tired. If you feel that you're not the best version of yourself, just take a minute, because the patients in your chair are quite likely or more likely to suffer harm than if you're feeling tip-top. Now that's me all done. The only thing I wanted to share with you is whether you're a member of Dental Protection or not, you have access to our podcasts that are open to everyone, and they cover off on all the topics that I've discussed and also include some cases. So it's my understanding that I'm going to do questions with Ben after this. So I'm ready to go, Trini, or ready to leave, however you want to put it.
you so much for that excellent presentation. It's so weird to hear it like that, because I feel sometimes we get sort of caught up in the day-to-day and we're in a rush and we just need to go back to the basics. That's the first thing. It doesn't matter how experienced we are, if we miss the basic things, we might make mistakes, and it's very important to just stay grounded and take things easy, make sure that we're doing that mental checklist. Just remember the little things. Stay in track with communication, always get your consent. Make sure that your record keeping is accurate, is good. Don't go over the top, but don't think that this is only just in case something goes wrong, to have it as a backup. But yeah, one day we might get sick and we might have another dentist treating that patient. So they need to know what we've done, how it's been done. And yeah, it's just the little things. So thank you so much for that excellent presentation, Annalene. And we will have you back in a few minutes after Ben's presentation. So don't go away. And Ben, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us again. Are you here? Ben,
I am here. Can you hear me? I put my presentation up, so hopefully you can see that too.
Yes, we can. Thank you
Fantastic.
so much. And for everyone, it is time to hear about continuing professional development, or the famous CPD hours. For the ones that remember, Ben was presenting last year. He did an excellent presentation about APRA registration process. And just a little bit about Ben Keith. He is the manager of the dental and multi-professional team of clinical advisors in the clinical input service at APRA. Ben has worked with APRA since 2013 and previously was a professional member at the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. From 2007 to 2013, Ben was the clinical director of dentistry and oral health at La Trobe University, establishing Australia's first rural dental and oral health school. Ben was chair of the Continuing Professional Development Committee for 8 years at the Australian Dental Association Victorian branch, and he held a number of roles with ADA committees in the federal and Victorian branches, as well as being a council member of the Victorian branch. Ben has worked with the ADC as an examiner and in assessing programs of study, and currently is also an examiner with the University of Melbourne DDS, or Doctor of Dental Surgery program. So thank you, Ben, for joining us, and I'll leave you to your excellent presentation.
Thanks very much, Trini, and welcome everybody this evening. As Trini said, my name's Ben Keith. I'm a dentist and I work for APRA. For those of you who may not know, APRA and the Dental Board work together to deliver what's referred to as the National Registration and Accreditation Scheme. And when you practice as a dentist in Australia, you must be registered with the Dental Board and APRA. So that's kind of who we are. So this is what I'm going to talk about today, a little bit of an overview of APRA and the Dental Board of Australia. Registrations, codes, guidelines, and other documents, just to give you some context about what those things all are and how they work together. Predominantly, I'm going to be talking about CPD, Continuing Professional Development, the registration standard guidelines, and some other resources that we have available for you. And I'm also just going to touch on recency of practice and CPD and how they might relate to each other. So coming back to APRA and the Dental Board. So APRA and the board are established under a piece of legislation called the Health Practitioner Regulation National Law Act, as in force in each state and territory. It's a piece of legislation that is enforced in each jurisdiction around Australia. So in Australia, we've got different states: Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, Northern Territory, etc., etc. And this legislation applies in each state and territory. It's not a federal piece of legislation. It's one which is held by each of the jurisdictions, and it's very, very similar in each one. So there are some minor differences, but pretty much the same legislation in each jurisdiction. The board and APRA work together to register dental practitioners, along with 15 other professions as well. And we have 15 boards, 16 professions. And our primary role is to protect the public. So the focus, you heard what Annalene said earlier about what their role is, and about looking after practitioners, and professional associations also look after practitioners. What the board and AHPRA do is their role is to protect the public. That's one of their key functions. So a bit different there. This is just a little bit of an overview about the scheme. And you can see over on the left-hand side of the scheme, and this is in the newly published annual report, we've got 920,000 or over 920,000 registered health practitioners in Australia. As I said, we've got 16 health professions which come under that. So they're not all dental practitioners, you'll be pleased to know. So 920 across those 16 professions. 70-odd thousand of those were first-time registrants in the annual year 2023 to 2024. The grey boxes that you can see, they're the ones that relate to dental practitioners. And you can see in our latest annual report, we've got just over 27,000 registered dental practitioners. And when we talk about dental practitioners, we're talking about dentists, we're talking about oral health therapists, dental hygienists, and dental prosthetists. So collectively, we refer to those as dental practitioners. You can see over in the diagram on the right-hand side of the screen that almost 3/4 of the registered dental practitioners are in fact dentists. So that's a bit of an overview of the scale and size of the scheme. So when you complete your ADC exam successfully, you'll be required to register as a health practitioner, a dental practitioner in Australia, and you cannot practice until you are a registered dental practitioner. So I'm going to touch now on these. So the obligations of a registered dental practitioner, and talk about standards, policies, codes, and guidelines, and try and help you make sense of some of these documents. So at the top of the tree, registration standards describe what you need to do to get registered and to stay registered. Some of those standards are common to all boards, and some are specific to the Dental Board of Australia. Then we've got these other documents, policies, codes, guidelines, FAQs, fact sheets, and these documents provide some specific and some general guidance depending on the document you're looking at, and they really describe what the board expects of you in your practice. So if you're thinking about all of these and you're looking at the board's website, you're thinking, what is the difference between a registration standard and a code, and what is that in a guideline? The registration standards are what you have to meet to be a registered health practitioner in Australia, and the other documents help support you and describe what the board expects of you. So coming back to those registration standards, if you look at some of those ones, I said there are some which are common across all the professions. So criminal history, English language skills, professional indemnity insurance, and that's what Annalene was talking to us about. You have to have indemnity insurance, continuing professional development, and recency of practice. Those are common standards across all the 15 boards. You'll see that I've highlighted in blue their continuing professional development, because that's the one I'm going to be talking about today. The Dental Board of Australia also has some specific standards which relate only to dental practitioners: dental scope of practice, endorsement for conscious sedation, specialist registration, and limited registration. For practitioners who are registered as general dentists, really the only one that's immediately relevant for you is the dental scope of practice registration standard. So now focusing down, so that's the overview of what those documents are and how to make sense of them. If you go to the Dental Board of Australia website, you'll see the registration standards, you'll see the code of conduct, you'll see guidelines, you'll see policies, you'll see other documents. So that hopefully will give you some idea of how those documents all work together. We're now just going to focus on the CPD registration standard, so continuing professional development. This document, the CPD registration standard, applies to all registered practicing dental practitioners. So it does not apply to non-registered practitioners, i.e. ADC candidates. So if you're not registered as a dental practitioner in Australia, this standard doesn't apply to you. If you are an ADC applicant, you don't have to meet this standard, okay? If you are a practitioner who is registered in Australia who holds non-practicing registration, you don't have to meet this standard. If you're a dental student in Australia, you don't have to meet this standard. So it only applies to registered practicing dental practitioners. What it says is currently, and I suppose I want to flag here right at the beginning, that standards, codes, and guidelines change. And so I'm talking today about what the CPD registration standard currently says. it may change in the future. And so you need to be aware of that, and you need to be conscious of what's put up on the board's website and communicate with the board when you are a registered prac. So this is what it said currently. So you have to do 60 hours over a 3-year period. So 60 hours of continuing professional development every 3 years. A minimum of 48 of those hours must be clinical or scientific based, and a maximum of 12 may be non-scientific based. So they might be things like CPD on accounting, or how to run your practice well, or something like that. But 48 hours, a minimum of 48 hours, must be based on clinical or scientific activities. So meeting the registration standard is a requirement for all registered dental practitioners. And when you renew your registration, you must declare that you have met it every time you renew. And when you're a registered dental practitioner in Australia, you have to renew that registration every 12 months. So you make that declaration every 12 months. And that declaration is what we call a statutory declaration. And there are consequences if you make a false declaration. So it's really important when you are registered in Australia that you make all those declarations honestly and fairly. I said earlier that the board's role is to protect the public. It's not punitive to practitioners. So it can sometimes feel punitive, and I think Annalene kind of referred to that in her presentation as well. Sometimes it feels like practitioners are being told off. That's not the intent. The intent is to protect the public. But if, say, you have not done your 60 hours of CPD over the 3 years, you should not declare that you have. So if you honestly declare and say, well, no, I haven't done my 60 hours, maybe I've only done 52 hours and I'm 8 hours short, tell the board nothing terrible is going to happen. They're just going to want you to make up those additional hours and probably say, please, in the future, make sure you do the right thing. So please always answer those declarations honestly. So how do we know what goes on? So we ask you to declare that you're meeting the standard. We also check that you're complying with it. So AHPRA can and does audit practitioners from time to time. So that means you may get a random letter from AHPRA saying, please provide evidence that you've met the requirements of the standard. So then what evidence do you have to keep? You've got to keep it for about 5 years. You have to have a logbook, and that logbook must be produced when the board requests it. The logbook must include details of the activities, the number of hours, and whether it was scientific or non-scientific activity. And there'll be more on this when we get to the guidelines on the standard as well. As I said, if you don't meet the standard, the board can impose a condition or conditions on your registration, or can refuse an application for registration or renewal of registration. I have to say that for a board to refuse an application for registration or renewal would probably be with a history of significant non-compliance. If you don't, or you haven't met all the requirements of meeting those hours, the board may impose conditions that you undertake the number of hours it would take until you complete the required number of hours. But once you've done that, the condition will be removed. So the guidelines, as I've said, registration standards at the top, guidelines and other documents try and help you meet the requirements of the registration standard. So the guideline on CPD provides information on how to meet the registration standard. So when you read the registration standard, you'll see it's quite brief. The guidelines are a bit more lengthy and they've got a bit more information in them, and I'll talk about that now. So that they will describe what may be scientific or non-scientific activity. So I said earlier that maybe something on practice finances would be considered non-scientific activity. If you go to the guidelines and have a look, there'll be a further description of what might be non-scientific and what might be considered scientific to help you understand and make decisions about what those 48 hours must be and what the other ones can be. It'll talk about other programs of study. If you're registered for the first time as a dental practitioner during the 3-year CPD cycle, the minimum required hours of CPD will be calculated on a pro rata basis, and there's a document in there to help you do that. So if the 3-year period, and if you jump down to the bottom of this slide, you can see the current 3-year period is the 1st of December 2022 to the 30th of November 2025. So say if you got registered in, say, July 2023, you're of course not going to have to do the 60 hours for that whole 3-year period. And there's a pro rata tool within the guidelines that helps you calculate how many hours you have to do. So that's in there in the guidelines as well. There's information on how to choose CPD activity appropriately, and further information on keeping a record of that activity. We also have a self-reflective tool. Annalene talked about the self-reflective tool for dental records. We also have one which can help you with this. So scope of practice, and actually even if you did the one on dental records, you can consider that as CPD as well, a self-reflective exercise on how well you're keeping the records. We've also got one on scope of practice, and that could help support your professional development as well. We also have an FAQ document which provides answers to some common questions, and all those resources can be found on the board's website. So I understand that there's often a series of questions that come in from ADC candidates about CPD. So maybe some of these questions will help. As I said, there is a FAQ document and there are some questions in there, but I think some of these questions may be relevant as well. So I'm in the process of undertaking ADC assessments. Do I have to undertake CPD? No, you don't. Not as far as the Dental Board of Australia and AHPRA is concerned. It's a requirement, remember, as I said, for registered and practicing health practitioners. Do I need to demonstrate that I've undertaken CPD when I first registered with the board? No, you don't. When you complete the ADC exam, the examination is an indication that you have met the competencies, that you meet the particular section of the national law that's relevant, and you're qualified to register in Australia. So CPD doesn't come into that question. So no, you don't have to demonstrate CPD when you first register. Once you have registered and you renew, you're going to need to comply with the registration standard, and the guidelines will help you do that. How do I select CPD courses? Seek guidance from the guidelines. As I said, there is information in the board's guidelines to help you choose the CPD and CPD that might be relevant for you. It's also a really, really good idea to talk to your colleagues and professional networks, and maybe your indemnity provider, such as DPL, who Annalene works for, can help you with some of that as well. Who are CPD providers? The board does not regulate CPD courses, and this is a very common question, but the CPD, how you choose CPD and what CPD you want to take is your choice. When you're registered as a practitioner with the Dental Board of Australia and you're practicing, the board considers you to be a professional and that you can choose the professional development that suits your practice, your scope of practice, the type of work you want to do, and that you will choose appropriate courses. So the board does not regulate CPD courses. I'm going to touch briefly on now CPD and recency of practice. As I said, once you've completed the ADC exam, there's a particular section of the national law that's met, which indicates that you're qualified for registration, and that is section 53C of the national law. So that's your ticket to being qualified and meeting that particular requirement for registration with the Dental Board. Now, the Dental Board of Australia's Recency of Practice registration standard also defines what a recent graduate is, and it says a recent graduate means a person applying for registration on the basis of a qualification for registration that was awarded not more than 1 year prior to the date of their application. Completing the ADC examination may be considered a qualification for this purpose, i.e., if you put in that on the basis of the ADC exam for registration that was awarded not more than 1 year prior to the date of your application. So what that means is if you do not apply for registration within 1 year of successfully completing the ADC exam, you will not meet the recency of practice registration standard because you don't meet the definition of a recent graduate. So what does that mean? If you don't meet the recency of practice registration standard, things like professional development, activity related to the practice of dentistry, and involvement in and connection with the profession undertaken in the period will be taken into consideration. I really just wanted to highlight that because there's that question of, do I need CPD to be registered? No, you don't, unless you don't meet the recency of practice registration standard. And in those circumstances, it will be considered. We do recognise that once candidates complete the ADC exam, they may need to go back to their home country, they may need to sort out their life, they may need to complete an English language test, and those things may delay registration beyond 12 months since successfully completing the ADC exam. So anything you do in that period will assist the board in its application, your application for registration in terms of recency of practice. So if you've continued doing some study, you've stayed connected to the profession, you've been to some CPD events, that will assist the board in and assist you in your application for registration. It is, if you are 12 months or 18 months or 2 years, you will be registered. You just have to go through this extra process, and it might delay the process a little bit more as the matter is considered individually by the board. So I hope that is helpful for you. So CPD not required if you're going to register within 12 months. If you haven't registered, do some CPD because it will help your application move along. There is some information on the board's website, dentalboard.gov.au, an AHPRA website, and that international practitioners page as well. That's all I have for you today, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that excellent presentation. I know many people already had answers, questions probably written down, just ready to throw them to you, and you just did it yourself. So good that you put that other questions you may have. I already had questions in there and you already solved them all for you, but I am pretty sure many people must have some other questions. So we are gonna welcome back Dr. Annaline, and we are gonna have a little panel discussion. And we are gonna start with some questions for Annaline. I'm so sorry. Okay, someone is asking if you could please share consent flow chart and inclusions, any documents that you might have showed in your presentation that could be just shared for all the candidates and dentists.
Absolutely, I'd be delighted to. So that document that I put up, I can't put it in the questions. So I've just shared that with you, Trini, and I'm not sure if you or Gus can put that for the attendees to be able to see. But the resource that I put up, I've put the direct, or I've provided the direct link to that now. That's available to everyone. So the resources on the Dental Protection webpage are available to both members and to non-members. So there's, I'm just going to share so you can see what I can see. When you go onto the web page, you can see here publications and resources, and you can see we've got some case studies, some audit tools, and then things that you might find interesting. If you're looking for the advice booklets, they're under publications. If you're looking for some articles about things, like checklists, here we go, short-term orthodontics, managing difficult interactions, lots of things that could be helpful. And you can also find the podcasts on there, and that's available to both members and non-members. So I hope that that answers that question.
That is excellent. And
Okay.
any other links or flowcharts that Annaline is sharing to us, we will post them in the ADC website, so it's available for everyone.
Yeah.
So
and the ADA are amazing too. They have so much stuff on there that's, you know, super helpful. Yeah.
Just a matter of diving in and just exploring the websites, because there's so much material in there available, but sometimes we just don't make time. Now, I have another question for you, Annaline.
Okay.
Someone wants to know, if the patient is not happy with the treatment done by another dentist, how would you handle that situation?
That's a great question. I'm going to answer it, and then I'm going to see if Ben has a different or the same answer, because I'm really curious to know what Ben thinks. So I think if you have a patient that comes in and they report that they're not happy with the previous dentist and the previous treatment that's been provided to them, I think it can be really easy to slip into being perceived as being critical of your colleague. But the reality of it is you don't know the circumstances of that treatment. You don't know what discussions were had. You don't know the facts of the matter. And you also don't know how difficult that patient is to treat. So I think it's really important to resist the temptation to rush to that patient's to save them from the terrible dentist in the past. I think it's always good just to document everything. Radiographs, good records, intraoral photos of what you can see can be incredibly helpful. If you think they're going to complain about that colleague, sometimes it can be helpful, I think, to let that colleague know. Do you agree with that, Ben? To let that colleague know that a patient's unhappy with them, to give them the opportunity to reach out to them?
Sure. I mean, I think there's shades of grey, really, of
Always.
course. And I mean, I suppose my mind turns to the notion of a mandatory notification, that if you see work that is significantly below an expected standard, what your obligation might be. But I don't think we're in that space. I think we're
I don't
talking
think
about,
so either.
I think we're just talking about someone who's just not happy with something someone's done. In that case, I absolutely agree with you that sharing that information and communicating between the health practitioners would be a very helpful thing to do.
Yeah, and I think it's really good, thanks, Ben, to look at what the treatment that the patient, sorry, is unhappy with, and ask yourself some questions like, is it okay? Is it okay? If you change it, are you going to do anything better? But documenting is really, really helpful. I think taking photographs in particular, intraoral photos have been a game changer, I think, in patient education, but also in documenting when patients aren't happy. But I would just say again, don't drink the Kool-Aid on that. Don't get sucked in, because you don't know the circumstances of that treatment. And we've all been caught out that way, haven't we, Trini, where we've tried to redo treatment and it's ended up not well.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of hindsight as well. Like sometimes when we're doing something for the first time, we don't know the circumstances, we might do something different. And then if we get a patient that wasn't very happy the first time, how are we like gonna go and judge how things were done the first time because we have more information? So yeah, I think stay humble, always be very objective, and don't go and criticize something that you don't know the circumstances of. And one more question, Annalene. Should the records be made or noted during the consultation or after the consultation with a patient?
That's a great question. I love it. It depends. So it can be quite hard, I'm being deathly serious, to write in real time. If you think about it, when you're trying to have a conversation with a patient and you keep then turning around and writing notes, that can be quite difficult. So often by the very, and from an infection control perspective also, so often by the very nature of our treatment, the discussion needs to be documented afterwards. What I do is my dental assistant actually writes my notes in real time. My dental assistants are all absolutely amazing, and they are trained to listen to the conversation and pick out key points and document it in real time. And I find that that's really, really helpful. So by the nature of the job, because we have gloves on and our hands in someone's mouth, the records are often written after the event. But getting somebody to help you with that, now to be clear, they're still my records. I'm still responsible for the quality of them. So I have to check them and make sure I'm happy with them before we press that magic enter. But that's how I do it. So it depends. And if you've got someone to help you write records, then all the better. Ben, would you add to that? Or do you think that's a fair answer?
Oh, no, I think that's a very fair answer.
Excellent.
And I think it also depends on the type of work being done. I mean, if it's relatively straightforward and maybe your dental assistant is doing an odontogram for you or a periodontal chart, but if maybe you're doing some more comprehensive treatment like sort of multiple crowns and bridges and things like that, you need to write more. Sometimes you actually need to go away and put some dedicated time aside to do that successfully.
Yeah, I save time at the end of every session. And I also recheck all my x-rays at the end of every day. Because I think sometimes when I have tired eyes, or if I know I've got patients in the waiting room, so that's just a little process I have as well. I check my records and I check my x-rays. I don't know, works for me.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for those answers. And now I'm going to put Ben on the spot. So we have a couple of questions for Ben. If you are a registered dentist but have not moved to Australia yet, then what should we keep in mind while selecting an appropriate CPD course?
So I'm presuming from that when you say registered, that the person is registered with the Dental Board of Australia. I'm going to assume that. Then it comes down to, what do you want to select that's appropriate for your practice? And that's what the board will not do, is tell a practitioner what CPD they have to do. There's no specific requirements. But reflecting on the type of practice you do in your practice, and if you're registered in Australia, but you're actually practicing overseas, you're registered here, you still need to meet the board's CPD's requirement. So you still need to do that 60 hours. You still need to account for that. What you do in that 60 hours is still up to you. And it might be relevant for your practice overseas. So if you're doing a particular type of practice overseas, do what suits you there. Once you move here, that might shift. You might be doing something different. The location of your practice might be, there might be different community needs. You might choose your CPD a bit differently, but ultimately what you do and how you choose your CPD is up to you as a registered health practitioner.
I guess it depends on your interests as well. If you want to
Absolutely.
develop one side a lot more than others, it depends.
Sure. If you're really, really interested in doing endo and you love doing endo in your practice, you might want to go and do a lot of CPD on endo, and that's completely fine. Other people like me who really didn't like endo that much probably chose not to do that much endo CPD, so that's fine too. You do what you do that suits your practice, and you choose it, and you must choose CPD. It's good to choose CPD that's good and actually helps train you and makes you confident and educates you and is good CPD, but you're the best judge of that.
That's exactly right. And now we have one more question that is highly linked to this one. I am a registered dentist, but still overseas. Is overseas CPD valid?
Absolutely. Totally. I mean, if you think about where you can get CPD from, you can get it from reading the journal article, you can get it from watching a webinar, you can get it from traveling overseas and going to a conference or a convention. You could get it from, if you're in Australia, from your local study group, your local ADA group. So yes, CPD can come from anywhere. It's a global world and there's information happening in all sorts of places. But again, how you choose your CPD and the quality of your CPD is for your judgment. But yes, absolutely, that's fine.
Great. Okay, do we have any more questions, or would Annalene or Ben want to add anything to what you've already given us for today?
No, I want to say thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Some really interesting questions are coming through on the chat, actually, some great questions, and it shows people are really thinking. A lot of these ones that are questioned, that resource I gave you, the answers are in there. So, yeah.
I am not going to let you go yet. I am so sorry. We just got one more question coming in here. So it says, what happens if you pass the ADC exam, but it takes more than 12 months to meet the IELTS Stand 7, so that's the English test requirement. You are out of the registration and have to make the whole ADC exam again?
Okay, I'll answer that one. I think that was for me. So no, you don't. So completing the ADC exam successfully means that you've satisfied that particular section of the national law I put up, section 53C. So you hold a qualification. You're kind of there. You've done it, okay? If you don't register within 12 months, the problem is that you don't meet the recency of practice registration standard. But that's okay. You just need to say that it's been more than 12 months since you completed your qualification, and then you'll be required to fill in another form and send that in with some supporting documents. And if you've been working even overseas, or maybe you've been in Australia and trying to sit the IELTS exam, and maybe you've been working as a dental assistant, or maybe you've joined the ADA, or maybe you've done some CPD as well, whatever it is, and you just tell us all of that stuff, and the board will make a decision about your application. And they will register you. I mean, unless it's been a very, very long period of time. I don't want to talk about how long, but it would have to be a number of years. The board will register you. They may choose to put some conditions on your registration if that period of time has been a little while and there are things which they think could present a public risk, but then you just do those things and those conditions go away and then you get on with your life and it's all fine. So I hope that answers the question.
I think it definitely does. Thank you so much. Now I will let you go. I know you are very, very busy. Every minute counts. We do appreciate your time, your effort, everything that you're giving us today. Thank you for being with us. Ben, thank you, Annalene. And we will probably skip the break. I'm not sure if everyone wants to skip the break. And we'll just keep on going with the next presentation.
Very well. Thanks, Trini.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye-bye. Take
Thank you
care.
so much. Have a lovely rest of the day. And just give me a second. We are going to welcome John, Associate Professor John Boucher. Thanks for being with us today.
You're welcome, Trini. We ready to just continue?
We are ready to just continue. Let me interrupt you for 1 second. I know we were supposed to have a little break. If someone needs to do something, just run out and come back in, because we are going to have Dr. John Boucher, who will be talking about examination, diagnosis, and treatment planning. And before we go ahead and move on with anything else, I just want to remind everyone that if you have questions and you didn't have time to send them on time, or we didn't get to talk about it today, the most repeated questions we will be put in a Q&A and published in the ADC website, so everyone can have access to it in the future. Okay, and now I'm going to introduce Associate Professor John Boucher. He graduated from the University of Melbourne in 1978 as first in graduating class with first class honors. John is a general dentist with a career-long involvement in dental education and assessment, having completed 43 years of teaching and examining at the Melbourne Dental School, University of Melbourne. John is a past president of the Australian Dental Council, having been an examiner for the past 30 years. John has also had long-term involvement in organised and regulatory dentistry, and is a past president of the Dental Practice Board of Victoria and the Victorian Registration and Notifications Committee of Dental Board of Australia. John is currently a director of the Royal Australasian College of Dental Surgeons, the Victorian Medical Insurance Agency Limited, Medical Indemnity Protection Society, or MIPS, and Melbourne Teaching Health Clinics, University of Melbourne. He is a graduate of the Australian Institute Company of Directors, and in 2019, he was appointed a member of the Order of Australia for significant service to dentistry and to professional standards. So thank you so much, John. And I will leave the screen and give it all to you.
Thank you, Trini. What I'm going to present today, and I shall share screen now, if I'm able to find it. And this is a presentation that I generally give on behalf of the Royal Australasian College of Dental Surgeons. It's something that I then follow up with another 2 or 3 hours of case presentations where we apply these principles. But this evening, we're just going to be delivering the lecture component only. The other thing that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is yesterday, the ADC made a really significant announcement that I took close personal interest in. Back in 2000, I examined an outstanding ADC candidate in the practical examination, and her name was Felicia Valianatos. I soon after mentored Felicia into a role as an ADC examiner, and she has filled many roles since. Yesterday, she was announced as the new president of the ADC, something to which any of you can aspire. So Felicia is just a very good example of the pathway that can be taken through ADC assessment. So if we get on the move, what I'm going to present tonight is a generic template that you can apply to an individual case and not one size fits all, but that something that is customized to each case. And at each stage of examination, diagnosis, and treatment plan, this customization takes place. And the resulting plan needs to be as flexible as that plan develops. This is, I guess, examination 101 that you've all learnt at dental school, and that is to the standard that the ADC is looking for. So we need to record these things, and there's relevance behind each of these 10 points. But in any particular case, some will be much more important than others. For example, the medical history might be irrelevant to the case at hand, or it could be, in fact, central to the case. So here's a list of 10 things that we may well want to investigate. And certainly, as Annalene pointed out, we may very well wish to record, because of all of this background makes a contribution to our examination, and then our diagnosis, and then our treatment plan. So in the personal details, we want to look at the gender identity. The age of the patient can often be important and relevant. We'd like to know if the patient's working full-time, part-time, if they're retired, and their family and social history may also be relevant. Do they live with family? Do they live alone? Are they independently mobile? And the medical history is customised to age, sex, other parameters. For example, there's not much point asking males if they're pregnant. And I want to make a strong point here. The medical history is not a form. And the form is useful. It initiates conversation. And as Annalene said, consent is not a consent form that's signed. In much the same way, a medical history is not a questionnaire that's signed. The questionnaire should be risk-based, and we'll go into this a bit in a moment. And the questionnaire, as I said, is not the medical history. It's a prompt for both the patient and the dentist to make sure they cover all of the important aspects. You always need further interrogation of the patient based upon the answers provided, and it needs to be countersigned as read by the dentist and appropriate further questions asked as required. Now, here's a well-known questionnaire. This is from the Royal Dental Hospital of Melbourne, and it's provided by Dental Health Services. And the questions here are, again, risk-based. And it's for the rest of other particular medical conditions that we as treating dentists may wish to be aware of. So in risk-based questions, what are we looking for? We're looking for a risk of endocarditis, a risk of joint prostheses if they're recently placed. Even Annalene came up with continued bleeding. We need to know about anticoagulants, and not just anticoagulants. There are many, many other medications that increase the risk of bleeding. Yes, we do want to know if patient's pregnant and at what stage of pregnancy they're at, some sort of assessment of the patient's current cognition. Are they taking corticosteroids, and does that compromise healing as diabetes would? Do we have allergies? Latex allergies are becoming more and more important, and we need to know if there's a latex allergy long before we do the examination and pull on latex gloves. Is the immunity compromised? Are there cardiac issues? Is there an implanted pacemaker or defibrillator or a valve replacement? There are many things, many questions to explore, and all of them are risk-based. Do we have a smoking history? Is there respiratory compromise? Have we been treated for neoplasms, either radiotherapy, chemotherapy, or even immunotherapy? So we also need to look at a list of medications, and that again is risk-based. We're interested in current medications, but in the case of bisphosphonates, we're also interested in past history of bisphosphonates because the adverse effects can linger for a long time after ceasing that medication. What do we have in the way of potential for interaction with monoamine oxidase inhibitors and tricyclic antidepressants? There's a huge range today of anticoagulants or things that would increase the bleeding risk. Is there a medication-related osteonecrosis of the jaw risk, as in bisphosphonates or denosumab? Are there certain medications that potentiate other medications? And oftentimes, the medical history will indicate that there's an undisclosed medical history. For example, you might ask the patient why they're taking an anticoagulant, and that might say, the patient might say that, oh yes, I've got a cardiac valve prosthesis. And many dentally relevant medications. There are myriad drugs that will cause xerostomia, and there are periodontal conditions that will come about purely because of the medication, including calcium channel blockers and phenytoin. So then we go back to basics. Why is the patient presented? Common reasons can be pain, can be a broken tooth or restoration. They may want to improve their aesthetics. They may just be interested in preserving their dental health, in which case they're presenting for assessment. They may feel that they have a complicated dental problem and may feel that they need a referral, or it might be an emergency related to trauma. Most pain histories are targeted at a pulpal pain, and all of these things, again, 101 from dental school. Is the pain stable? Is it worsening? Is it occasional? Is it intense? Is it worse at night? What stimulates it? Does it radiate? Or is it localized to a well-defined area? The previous dental history also helps us come up with a diagnosis, but it also gives us an idea when we're beginning to formulate a treatment plan that's appropriate for the specific case. So, has their previous history been episodic? Do they only present when they feel they have an issue that needs addressing? Have they presented many times for a particular tooth? Or are they someone who values regular managed care by their dentist? It's nice to have a chain of care. It's nice to know who their previous practitioners were, and there may be written history available. There may be records like study models and radiographs that are recent and may be useful to help inform our examination, diagnosis, and treatment plan. Habits are interesting. The typical ones are smoking and alcohol. But of course, as dentists and trying to work out the etiology of presenting conditions, we need to know about their dietary habits. Sugar drinks, sports drinks with a very low pH. Caffeine intake can be really relevant, particularly if it's sports drinks or energy drinks. Is there parafunction? Do you notice in talking to the patient that they're posturing? Could they be clenching? Is there bruxism? What's their standard of oral hygiene and how do they achieve that? Is it frequent enough? Is there interdental cleaning? Is the approach to oral hygiene and prevention structured? And again, more 101 in examination. So we look at the face externally, extraorally. We look frontally. What is their general facial features? We look laterally. Are they class 1, 2, or 3? Is there symmetry? We might look for lymph nodes. We might palpate those. Is there a TMJ click? Is it something that we ask about only, or is it something that we palpate? All of these questions are worthwhile asking. Are the muscles tended to palpate, or are they only palpate tender on clenching? What is the current state of play from a functional point of view? And this is where dentists do things really well, and that's the intraoral examination. Soft tissue, we look at the lips and cheeks. We look at soft palate and the mucosal linings for all of these structures. Tonsils may be evident. Flora of the mouth, and again, this would have a heightened degree of suspicion. We're in age dependent. We may be inclined to look much more carefully in the flora of mouth of an elderly or older patient who's a smoker, for example. And a bit like I described earlier, our examination should be risk-based and pay our greatest attention to areas of risk without skipping over the obvious things. Are we going to have a look at the tongue? Dorsum, lateral borders, ventral surface, and the hard tissues. How do the teeth relate to each other, both in centric occlusion and dynamic occlusion? The thing that dentists are really good at is recording an odontogram of existing teeth, existing restorations, any pathology related to teeth, is there caries, cracks, and something that is regularly overlooked, and I'm sure Annalene would support this, is that it's not often that a comprehensive periodontal chart is done at the first examination. And we need to be aware of this because that will form the way in which we formulate our treatment planning and our diagnosis for that matter. So, having done our physical examination, there may well be other investigations that we would wish to undertake. Annalene spoke of radiographs, and typical example of a radiograph is an OPG. It can be for a specific purpose, or it can be for general screening. And the statement is made that throughout a dental career, a patient in a lifetime should probably have 2 or 3 OPG radiographs. There might be one in infancy, in childhood, to assess the mixed dentition. It might be taken for a general periodontal assessment. It may be the first time an OPG is indicated is when third molars are having difficulty erupting. We can get a look at TMJs, although not a specific assessment, and it is useful just for screening. Bite wings, the frequency of which, based on a caries risk assessment, it might be as frequently as 6 or 12 months, or in a very stable case, it may not be every 4 years. And periapical radiographs are often directed by other investigation results or radiographs. And again, the cone beam computed tomography is directed by other radiographs. It's not the first thing that you do, and these may very well require specialist oral and maxillofacial radiologist interpretation rather than the general dentist. Other investigations, we spoke earlier about a pain history, and often in dental issues, it's a pulpal pain history that we focus upon. And these things that we ask about are often important. Does the pain linger? Is it spontaneous? What stimulates it? Is it hot or cold? Is it tender to touch? What's the quality of the pain? There are many descriptors that go with pain quality. Is it intense? Scale of 1 to 10 is sometimes helpful. Where does it radiate? Does it respond to analgesics? All of these things are important, and what we're doing is building a picture that will allow us to come to a diagnosis. We might percuss teeth. Palpation's useful within the sulcus and feel the alveolus. Pulp sensibility tests, there'll be things that lead us to suggest that we may have necrotic or non-vital pulpal tissue. And so we might do a CO2 pulp test, and that'll be indicated by the presenting symptoms and other investigations. An electric pulp test might be useful where CO2 is inconclusive, and with the use of selective rubber dam isolation and warm to hot water, we can test for a response to heat, where we're trying to replicate presenting symptoms. Transillumination is often useful using just the mouth mirror and the operating light. We can use a dedicated light source as well. Something that's becoming more and more important, certainly in Australia at the moment, is the existence of cracked cusps and symptoms related to that. And so selective cuspal loading with a response either on release or loading can really help with the diagnosis. We might want to gather a dietary history. And just like we spoke before about a signed consent form or a signed medical history form, the dietary history is not the form. The dietary history is the discussion and the management plan that comes about interrogating the recorded diet history. And so it's a point of discussion with the patient and a resolution of what we do about it. We might look at a salivary assessment, particularly if we've got unexplained or difficult to explain outbreak of dental caries. And there are the 5 things that we want to assess. We want to assess the quality of that saliva, the quantity, pH, buffering capacity, and how well hydrated our patient is if we've got diminished saliva production. And of course, this is risk-based. We're more likely to do this in a patient that has polypharmacy. We're more likely to do this in an older patient or where we see an unexplained outbreak of dental caries. Another very, very useful investigation is assessing the restorative status of a tooth by removing existing restorations, dismantling the restorations, and we can see then whether we've got cracks. We can assess the restorability and the prognosis of what might be doubtful teeth. Biopsy rarely, and you may refer to that, and even more rarely bacteriological culture, although some of the dental supply companies do have an ability to identify certain organisms that are likely to contribute to pathology. And do we consider referring Do we refer just for an opinion, or do we refer for an opinion or treatment? And for each of the specialities, there's good reasons to. We might have a very difficult endodontic case that we're not able to do ourselves, or you may have a case that requires retreatment or with fractured instruments. And in a case like this, it's best to, at the very least, get an opinion from our specialist colleagues. In periodontal disease, we may well need advanced management. We may want to assess the general viability of the dentition with regard to its periodontal adequacy. And this may well inform our treatment plan and let us understand the periodontal risks. We may wish, from a restorative point of view, we may wish to have a tooth crown lengthened to facilitate its restoration. There's aesthetics, and we may wish to have the periodontal condition under favourable environment prior to embarking upon complex restorative care. The oral and maxillofacial surgeons, patient may require treatment under hospital conditions. There may be difficult teeth to remove. It could be impacted teeth with poor prognoses. It could be consideration of orthodontics in collaboration with an orthodontic colleague. And there are other reasons to consider the maxillofacial surgeons. Again, oral medicine. We're not all experts at mucosal management because some things just do not appear regularly and we're not familiar with those. TMJ management, many general practitioners are competent and capable, but occasionally we need specialists. More and more general practitioners are becoming competent in straightforward orthodontic treatment, but we may very well need an orthodontist opinion and treatment for specific reasons. Pediatric referral is commonly for behavioural management. Pediatric dentists are very competent in syndromic management, and they can assess and treat appropriately at every developmental stage. Our special needs colleagues, there may be an indication for domiciliary management, and as the Australian population ages and more people are in aged care facilities with limited mobility, domiciliary management is going to become much more common. Again, today, there are many very competent general practitioners who can place routine, straightforward implant treatment cases. But where it's complex or where you need grafting for hard or soft tissues, experts will give a better outcome for the patient. And when it comes to prosthodontics, again, general practitioners can be competent, but when it comes to occlusal rehabilitation or a combination of removable, hybrid and fixed prostheses, it's probably someone who has the skills and the experience that we may well need to consult. So, what's a diagnosis? There are usually multiple intersecting diagnoses for any case, and commonly the same etiology for periodontal disease and for carious disease. They're intersecting. They're subtly different, but the etiologies are much the same. Now, a diagnosis brings together all of what we found in examination, in our specialist tests, our other investigations, and perhaps our specialist opinions. And occasionally, we don't quite know what the diagnosis at the time is, and we're not sure. We'll have differentials depending the results of our further investigations. And the cause, as I said earlier, can be attendant to multiple diagnoses. So with diagnoses, we can formulate a problem list. It's a list of non-prioritized. It's a statement of the diagnosis that we've come to arrive at, having completed our examination. And generally, we apply causes and etiology, because if we don't know the cause, we can't treat the problem. And a simplified example of this may be caries. We note caries in various places. And this could be due to poor oral hygiene. It's common. Could be a combination of poor oral hygiene and poor diet. There may not be an exposure to fluoride or a remin strategy. If we've got missing teeth, we may well, I've just lost my place. We may well not have enough masticatory function. Discolored teeth is another common thing that people will come and ask you about, and we need to find the cause of that. It can be many causes. If we've got chronic infection, we need to find out why, and therefore, if we know why, we can come up with a treatment plan to address that. So to transition from a problem list to a treatment plan, this is going to require treatment that addresses each of the problems related to diagnoses and each of the causes. And this is where we need to sit down and talk with the patient, a bit like Annalene describing how we get informed consent. First of all, we want to know what the patient expects. Do they expect to be returned to their former glory? Or do they just want to be pain-free? Do they just want to be comfortable? That's something important to establish, because if we don't understand patient needs or expectations, we might be providing treatment the patient's not interested in. There might be some complex treatments indicated, and we need to prioritize certain things. The patient may prefer not to address aesthetics, for example, and just have pain relief, and that's valid. We need to formulate our treatment plan around the patient, and this is a term that we call patient-centered care. Patients will, and oftentimes that's the first thing they ask, what's this all going to cost? And is the treatment plan that you propose, is that the only alternative? And through all of this, once we've had this discussion, we can approach informed consent. But I emphasize again, informed consent can only come from a thorough discussion where all of the information is presented to the patient. A treatment plan defines the order, the priority, the intervals between treatment visits. It also assigns tasks for each visit and a duration for each of the visits assigned to a task. It's a complex thing. And if it's a complicated treatment plan, where the outcome of certain procedures along the way are unknown at the beginning, we need to consider contingencies to build in to the plan and be flexible. We might be heading off in a fixed prosthetic direction, and we find that the abutment teeth are inadequate or hopeless, and we may need to consider removable prosthodontics. Things need to be flexible. Need to coordinate with others. Patients can be busy and have work commitments, and the time of day that they can attend might be limited. They may be living alone and unable to get themselves to your clinic. And they may rely on carers to do that. They may have dental insurance issues. And of course, they will wish to optimize the return they get from their insurance. If we're dealing with laboratories, we need to know time turnarounds, and that will help us determine the intervals between visits. And we may be dependent on others, specialists, for example, the endodontist to complete the endodontic treatment, or a hygienist to stabilize the periodontal condition before we consider more complex treatments. So I'm going to go down again. Treatment Planning 101. I've come up with what I see as my broadest possible template for treatment planning, and by removing bits or emphasizing bits of this template, we can probably customize a treatment plan to any case that we wish. Number one on my treatment plan is, what would happen if we did nothing? Would this patient in 6 months, a year, 5 years be any worse off? And if so, how much worse off if we did nothing? And this is a quote from Hippocrates, to whom we all swear the Hippocratic Oath: primum non nocere. And it should also always be the first option amongst any alternatives considered. And then there's the emergency treatment, the preliminary phase, dealing with, if we can, timely intervention on whatever the patient presented to us with. It may be pain relief. It may be intervening to control rapidly progressing caries. And then we have the disease control phase. And there's many names for this over time. Melbourne University currently calls it disease control. And this will involve the basics. Educating our patient in what's expected of them to maintain oral health once we've guided them through. And that may very well mean oral hygiene instruction. But before that can be done, commonly the scaling and root debridement to carry out that will facilitate our oral hygiene instruction. Disease control phase. I'll say this many times. The most difficult thing to modify or control in a treatment plan are lifestyle issues. Smoking particularly, but also dietary considerations, things that compromise our salivary status, and lifestyle counselling in general. They're the most difficult things to change. We then look at non-surgical caries management and a remineralisation strategy. Is it site-specific, which tends to be the most efficacious, or is it more general? Certainly, we need to select the concentration of fluoride in toothpaste based on the caries risk assessment, and site-specific application can be very efficacious. Do we need CPP, ACP in our remin strategy? Is that through tooth mousse? Is it through varnish? Do we use Recaldent gum? What is most appropriate for this particular patient? And then we have the overarching home care, and it needs to be monitored. We need to educate in the first sense, and we need to assess what's best for this particular patient. Is the dexterity adequate to do an excellent job with a manual toothbrush? Do we need an electric toothbrush, and what kind of electric toothbrush and motion? And these might be site specific. You may have an area of a particular patient's mouth that's best with a manual that they manage, and other areas where an electric toothbrush does the job. Interdental cleaning, it's always difficult to educate and motivate for floss. Interdental brushes tend to be more accepted. Do we need to consider what is it that we're going to do in remin? Silver diamine fluoride. Silver fluoride may be useful in certain places, but again, we need to balance that against our surgical, our aesthetic needs. So then we come down to restorative management. And it's site and risk appropriate. Treating root caries will have a different restorative approach with different associated risks, different challenges in access. And all of these direct restorative materials have a place. Amalgam can still have a place in certain areas. We need to assess existing restorations. Are they cleansable? Do we really know what's happening underneath them, where we may dismantle restorations, as I suggested earlier, as part of our assessment and special tests? A tooth cracked. Do we need an overlay? Is a cracked tooth at risk of pulpal necrosis? Is it structurally sound, or will it eventually fail? And then there's the teeth that there's not much hope for. They can be unrestorable. They can be a future risk if they're impacted or unerupted. And we need to consider, in this sort of patient-centered care area, a whole of life outlook for what might happen. So this is the stage where we take a bit of a breather. We've addressed the immediate needs of the patient. We need to reassess. Have we reduced the caries risk? That's number one. And is the periodontal status stable? Have we done that most difficult thing and been able to counsel on lifestyle issues? Are the direct restorations we placed, are they adequate in the first instance or off into the future? Do we need to think about more complex restorations? And then we get down to our advanced management. And this is dependent upon our own unique skill set, our own unique abilities, our likes, our dislikes. I like doing endodontics, and I'm very comfortable to do that, not with all cases, for which I'll refer. Is the fixed prosthodontics complex, like I spoke earlier, is it rehabilitation? If it is, we probably need a specialist. And if we're considering removable pros, we need to coordinate it with our fixed restorations. Having completed that, at this stage, we need to create a plan for ongoing review. We want to make sure that our newly educated preventative plan continues to be in place, and that our patient takes control of their own well-being. And we often call that a maintenance phase. Now, along the way, we need to present to the patient, and Annalene said this was important, and I agree, to document for when we're getting informed consent. We need to talk about alternatives. And in the advanced management phase, there are many, many alternatives for each treatment. If we're talking about replacing teeth, there are many combinations and they need to be documented. And more importantly, though, the patient needs to understand the risks and benefits of each of those alternatives. If we look at the stages further, often there's no realistic alternative for disease control. We need to control the disease. But there are many alternatives to advanced management and many combinations. And consideration of a staged approach. Patients can get treatment fatigue. They may have multiple visits where a lot of work's done, and you might identify staging where you can give the patient a bit of a rest between major dental treatment phases. And also this can help manage with costs rather than getting significant cost all in one go. It can be spread out across a longer period once we've got stability. I mentioned before, an itemized treatment plan will have times associated with it. It will have durations, it'll have intervals, and there'll be alternatives. And the risks and benefits for each alternative should be made clear to the patient. You can draw on your experience. You can draw on an evidence base, statistical success rate. You can say, in my hands, molar endodontics is successful 90% of the time. And that's useful for a patient to make a decision. But of course, if they're one of the 10%, failure is 100% for them. And they need to understand that too. But it all comes down to patient understanding for informed consent. We can attach a cost to each alternative. We can identify payment milestones and costs for each visit. We pretty much know what we're going to do at each visit. We need to, however, allow for contingencies. Things may not go the way that we predict them, and we need to explain that. And this is where informed financial consent comes into consideration. And again, a staged or delayed approach can be useful. This is one of the most difficult things to do in a treatment plan, sequencing, what to do first. When we're building a house, you can't put the roof on until you've got the walls up. And so there's that aspect to staging a treatment plan and sequencing. Time allocation, often work in quadrants to optimize our efficiency and our use of local anesthesia. For the visit duration, again, we need to balance our efficiency with patient tolerance and fatigue. Many older patients just can't manage to be in the chair for that long. And so we need to stage our visits to accommodate that. Need to have intervals to allow for the staging. We may need healing time. If we've extracted a tooth and looking at placing an implant in a favourable situation, we need appropriate time. It might be 12 weeks before we consider implant placement. And there'll be delays related to laboratory stages as well. And sequencing these things needs to be considered. And that's where developing from a problem list to a well-considered sequenced treatment plan requires a lot of experience and skill. Now, another statement that I like to make is that all treatment plans are compromised. And they are. They're compromised in one way or another. We can have a concept of an ideal treatment plan and individualize that to a particular patient and their needs and situation. But in doing so, we need to consider patient non-compliance. Do they understand what they're getting in for? Are there assumptions and expectations that you haven't managed to flesh out in discussion? There may be social factors that modify what we can do. The patient, I spoke about dental treatment fatigue. They might just run out of puff. They may have systemic disease that compromises an ideal outcome of our ideal plan. Their emotional status, and above all, as dentists, we need to put the patient at the centre of the care. What is it that they really need? What is it that they really want? What will they benefit from? And these non-compliance factors, they can change during the course of treatment. Sometimes a complex plan might be a year in the making and completion, and things change. People's lives change during that. So we need to consider pre-existing disease at presentation. Are there just not enough sound teeth to complete a complex plan? So the substrate, the basis upon which we are going to build our treatment plan may not be up to it. Occlusion can destroy, non-favourable occlusion, hostile occlusion, can destroy a beautiful plan. Costs, patient might just not have the economic means to carry out a complex or very fancy treatment plan. And then we've got to look at ourselves. Are we the right person to carry out a complex plan? Do we have the technical skill? Do we have the knowledge? Do we have the experience? And are we compatible with the patient? Do we get on with that patient? Do we relate? And we'll know that fairly early on in the treatment, and we need to be prepared to perhaps modify or even abandon a treatment plan. So in summary, the optimal treatment plan will be ethical. Is this patient getting the best outcome from you as a generalist dentist? So is specialist management more appropriate? Is the plan evidence-based? Is this something the patient needs and not just wants? It'll be collaborative, and this needs to be between, of course, the dentist, the patient, but also other specialists, other practitioners, the family support, the laboratory. It needs to be flexible. We may have an abutment tooth that is central to our plan, and it turns out that abutment tooth has a vertical root fracture and can't be used. So we need to be able to readily modify our plan to cope with unforeseen things such as that. And it needs to be interactive. Above all, input from the patient is central, but we need to be responsive to inputs from specialists and others as well. So that's brought me to the end of my presentation. I'm not sure, Trini, how I've gone for time. I think I've done reasonably well, over a little. And your call, Trini, on whether questions are appropriate.
Look, we have plenty of questions, but before we go ahead with them, I want to say thank you. That was one of the most thorough presentations I've ever seen, and I think people had to probably duck out for a second to get extra paper to take more notes. That was very, very, very thorough. Thank you so much, John. So I wanna tell everyone that we got many questions, and unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go through all of that. But I'm gonna say, just trust your knowledge, your abilities, your skills, your experience and instincts sometimes, and just do what feels right. Make sure that you use all your background knowledge to support every single decision that you take in the practice, and just be in touch with the patient, with the clinical situation, show empathy. There is no right or wrong or black and white in many times, but you just need to find what feels right for you and what is right according everything we know. Okay, and now we're gonna go ahead with some questions for John. I'm sorry, just put them in here. Okay, we have, if the patient is in pain or angry, how do we go about taking history, especially medical history, before diagnosis or treatment planning?
I think despite the presenting situation, we've got to spend time explaining to the patient that the more knowledge we have, the better we can treat them. And treatment will be better and more appropriate if we have that knowledge. If they're angry, are they angry at you? And is it the first time that you've seen them? It would be unlikely that they're angry with you. They're angry with the situation. Being in pain, yes, it really can block their understanding of what you're trying to put across. But yes, you need that medical history. You need to know the background. You need all of the information you can gather. Now, perhaps the extent of your treatment will be limited to pain relief. And comprehensive treatment planning is something for another day.
Thank you for that. Now, the next one, how do we convey to the patient the chances of an undiagnosed medical conditions, for example, diabetes, that might be causing the severe gum disease in a patient giving unremarkable medical history and claiming to be performing effective oral hygiene? Yeah,
well, there's lots of holes in that position. Undiagnosed diabetes won't be solely responsible for the periodontal condition. There'll be the usual suspects, the usual factors, and it is the poor cleaning. If they're borderline diabetic, there'll be some role for the systemic disease to play, but it just comes down to local factors.
That's it. That's clear. Now, next question. If the patient's expectations are beyond our ability, or they ask for extensive treatment that we believe might have future problems for us, such as removing fillings that we believe are intact, can we suggest referring to another senior colleague or specialist, despite the fact that doing such treatment is in our scope of practice? How would you approach a patient in such cases?
Yeah, look, doing such treatment is in your general scope of practice, but if you don't feel comfortable doing it, it's not in your scope of your individual scope of practice. And yes, you should refer to a senior colleague, whether that's a senior generalist or a senior specialist. There's no problem with that. And that's to be applauded. Knowing your own limitations is one of the most important thing. And my limitations will be different to Trini's limitations. We're individuals, and it's okay to say no.
That's great. I will be sending you my root canals because that's my limitation. Now, John, I have one more for you. Are service dogs allowed in dental treatment room or clinic with disabled patients? And if yes, any precautions taken?
Look, I don't think so. I think I've only ever had that once, and it was a fabulous experience. That's something for patient and dentist to discuss at the time. A sensible patient will call and say, I feel a lot better with my support dog with me. Do you mind? And it depends what you're trying to do. The dog in my case just sat in the corner, and he was very comfortable and at home. So yeah, that's an individualized question and response, but it could very well facilitate your treatment. With a relaxed patient, you're going to produce much better results.
Thank you so much for your time, John, for your presentation. Once again, that was excellent, extremely thorough. I reckon it was just the most helpful thing for everyone going through the ATC process. So thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome, Trini.
And we are coming to the end of this ATC Candidate Forum 2024 edition. Thank you all for joining us today from all over the world. We had lots of very interesting, useful information, and we had lots of people from all over the world getting to just absorb all this knowledge. So before we go, I just want to remind you that the forum has been recorded. It will be available in the ATC website very soon. It will be available for all registered attendees. And one more thing, we will be sending you some feedback in the next few days. So please take your time, open that email, go ahead and do it. And it will include one section where we ask you for new ideas for future sessions. So if you want to have a say and you want to be heard, just take your time and please give us your feedback this week. And that is it. John,
Okay.
Thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for your time. I hope you have a lovely day or a lovely night, no matter where you are. And we hope to see you very, very soon.